Allow me to start, first of all, by thanking the taker and giver of life, who exhorts us to give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. So today I say thanks to him. I also had intended to thank the speaker that you are representing today for her guidance and patience, and thanks to the able staff of the Houses of Parliament who really have made the work that we do here so much easier with their professional support and dedication. Madam Speaker, I have been chosen by the people of St. Andrews Southwest to serve as their Member of Parliament and their representative. I am therefore always conscious of their concerns, their hopes, and aspirations whenever I speak. I commit to continue being faithful to their cause and to act with integrity and humility. To my Southwest family, some of whom are in the house today, I say thank you for your continued confidence in me. In advocating for and representing Southwest St. Andrew, I have had to lean on the support, advice, and assistance from my three councillors, Eugene Kelly, Carl Blake, Audrey Smith-Facey, my constituency secretary, Mr. Ellis, and the rest of the team. Today, Madam Speaker, I place on record my gratitude to them for their unwavering support and advice. I would also like to specially thank my office and support team, Lexi, Gail, Doreen, Marcia, Juby, and Nash, who have been extraordinary in my quest to provide consistent and quality representation. I must also thank, Madam Speaker, the Most Honourable Portia Simpson-Miller, without whom I would not be standing here today. I thank her for her faith and confidence in me to continue the tremendous advocacy and representation for which she's known during her 40 years of service to Southwest St. Andrew. A million thanks also to all those Jamaicans who offered prayers and well wishes during her recent hospitalization. We continue to pray for God's blessings for her. To the opposition leader, Mr. Mark Golding, thanks for entrusting me with the portfolio of Labour and Social Security, especially at this time when our workers are demanding greater protection from the government and a just and fair system for them to live, work, raise families, and do business with dignity and pride. Madam Speaker, to the members of the Task Force on Labour and Social Security who have been assisting me to advocate for a more equitable Jamaica, where we all feel valued and respected, I thank them for their contribution to the rock we call home. Last but not least, I thank my family for their unconditional support and love, especially my husband and sons. My dear Papa, my sisters, and other members of the family who are often called upon to shoulder responsibilities for which they did not sign up. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance came to Parliament and boldly declared that Jamaicans are better off now than before. At the same time, the Prime Minister also took many of us to task for suggesting that things are not as rosy as they made it seem. Madam Speaker, I understand the conundrum and why it's easy for some members in this House to think that everything is hunky-dory. They have no clue what Bob Marley meant when he said, "Rain a fall, but the dust it off." Rockstone has never been their pillow. They have never gone to bed with saucer crackers and some mint tea. I know those stories well, Madam Speaker. As Bunty says, poor people fed up, and you know the rest. Every Jamaican knows that if you owe a man and you agree that you're going to pay him each week, and you have made allowances in it from the little money that you get, and then you see that you have a little extra, it makes sense to buy a little more rice, a little more flour. That way, the children will be assured of a cooked meal, and they don't have to go hungry. Or maybe you can buy Alaska porridge so they can go to school with a little breakfast in their belly. Madam Speaker, this is what the leader of opposition meant when he spoke about cushioning the crisis, allowing them an opportunity to do a little bit more of some basic things. Our families, our workers, our youths, and our seniors are struggling to survive. It is particularly more difficult for them if they are living with disabilities, on fixed income, or in the informal economy. Madam Speaker, despite the thumping of desks and glee from the government benches, approximately 54% of Jamaicans still think that things are moving in the wrong direction. Jamaicans from all walks of life have been saying that all is not well. I've seen some in high office accuse them of being unpatriotic, but we know better. Against that background, Madam Speaker, my contribution today is made on behalf of those Jamaicans who are tired of government badness. The teachers, including those in early childhood, the sector, policemen and women of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, and other civil servants who, even though they have signed, are not pleased with how they have been treated. The lack of communication and disrespect when things go awry is unbecoming of good governance. This year, we have seen unprecedented unrest, industrial unrest, with disruptions in almost every sector. So, Madam Speaker, I speak on behalf of Misha, a mother of 4, who can barely put food on the table for her children. I speak on behalf of children with disabilities experiencing high levels of unemployment when compared to their able-bodied counterparts. I speak on behalf of those pensioners who welcome the 74% increase in weekly payments, but who know that $3,000 per week still means that they can't afford some basic items for their survival. And then they still have to deal with health care. These are the hard truths we must face when we talk about the Jamaican reality. Madam Speaker, as people flee our shores for a better life, and we have seen so many of that in the newspaper, we also hear members of the private sector and the Prime Minister himself saying that they can't find people to work, and suggesting that we need to look at importing labor. At the same time, the government talks about the lowest unemployment rate and the tightness in our labor market. Not much is said, though, about the 35.5% of the working age population considered economically inactive or outside of the labor force. It means, therefore, that before we think of importing labor, we need to really understand what's happening with these 35.5% Jamaicans. What is really responsible for this large number of disconnected individuals? What is the role of HEART and other workforce programs in resolving the situation? And why can't they train and certify more Jamaicans to meet the needs of industry? These are the questions that we need to answer. Madam Speaker, these answers are important to fashioning solutions for the current labor force concerns, and it also needs leadership and political will. Madam Speaker, truth is, in many ways, the conditions of labor still mirror economic structures on the plantation, with emphasis on low-wage employment and a large informal sector representing as much as 40% of total economic activity. And when you think of all of that, Madam Speaker, it means that we have to ensure that there's protection for our workers. But I'll come back to that. Madam Speaker, I want to deal with the issue of farm workers up front. And I will read from my prepared text because I know how much time I have and I will not divert by anything I've heard here today. Many Jamaicans were shocked at the initial responses coming from the minister regarding complaints by our farm workers, who were asking for reasonable protection, acceptable working and living conditions, a safe and confidential, listen to this, a safe and confidential mechanism to report issues, an assurance of independent investigations, and a pathway to residency as a way of protecting their rights as workers. It has taken almost 1 year for us to have the minister return with an update in the form of comments on the report, and he has tabled the report here today. The truth is, we need some details, and I'm not sure if they're in the report or not. I've not had a chance to read it, as you would imagine. We want to make sure that the farms from where there were complaints that they were visited. We want to know if there's a satisfactory program for periodic inspections to evaluate living and working conditions by our liaison officers or others. We also want to know if the open letter to the minister was actually used in terms of going to those farms and those workers to see what were the details of their complaints. Minister, the message from family members is that they are watching. And let us be clear. We all understand the importance of the Overseas Farm Workers Program. I have seen the difference it has made in the lives of many Jamaicans, particularly in rural Jamaica. And I know, too, that there are many farms offering excellent living and working conditions. But, Madam Speaker, the real problem is the response and attitude of the minister, who should simply have acknowledged the complaints that were made and moved speedily to send a team to investigate, including the meeting with signatories of the complaints. Madam Speaker, talking about farm workers, I want to put on record the tremendous contribution of the Most Honourable Portia Simpson-Miller. She was determined to ensure that Jamaicans participating in the program could actually be processed with dignity. Based on her tremendous work, Sister P, I am inviting the minister to name the Overseas Employment Center in her honor, based on all of the work that she has done. No, which prior knowledge? Madam Speaker, let me deal with the issue of the security guards. The backbone of the security infrastructure in Jamaica, approximately 30,000 strong, some will say. Last September, Justice Batts ruled that security guards who were employed under similar conditions as those at Maximum were employees and entitled to full benefits. At this point, Madam Speaker, I want to use the opportunity to thank the security guards and their advocates, especially Mr. Vincent Morrison, for standing up for their rights. The protests, press releases, interviews, and engagement are finally bearing fruit. Yes, after several months, we now have the minister using his leverage, as was suggested by the leader of opposition months ago. We welcome the decision, Minister, to meet with the security guards and the team to oversee the establishment of the Joint Industrial Council for the industry. Minister would also like to hear the terms of reference, and we hope they will move with dispatch. Because, you see, it is still critical for us to ask companies under the present circumstances to cease any punitive action until matters can be dealt with. This may mean some initial discussions immediately, as it would be a travesty, if the courageous workers who stepped forward to bring their plight to the public were to be victimized in the process. The protection of these workers and others who have not yet signed should be a priority. I would ask the Minister to issue clear instructions to all security officers as to how to proceed, to detail the process available to them for redress or clarification around the terms and conditions of their contracts. Minister, I've also indicated to you that information from some of the smaller companies and those trying to comply during this transition is that the current contract sum that has been agreed between the government and some of the larger companies are clearly impossible if the minimum wage of $14,000 is to be applied and benefits are to be granted to these guards. The net effect, of course, is that it would force many of the small businesses out of town. The feeling is, Minister, that the government is teaming up with the big boys and the other small ones are getting shafted. This cannot be allowed to happen. So I want to ask you, Minister, to pay specific attention to that matter and to investigate that. Minister, I also want to say to you that I think that you have failed the security guards by taking as long as you have to arrive at the decisions you did while ignoring them. Time will not permit me to place on record some of the provisions in the contracts, and we have been talking about that for quite some time. In any case, I think that we have been on record about the level of injustice that some of the provisions in these contracts represent. You see, Madam Speaker, it is important that the contract doesn't just say it's a contract of employment, but rather that you go through the provisions to make sure that it doesn't deny the workers of rights that they have in law. The present precarious position of many of the security guards, quite frankly, occurred, Minister, because of the hands-off approach that the Minister of Labour and the current government chose. I believe that the time has come for a new direction for industrial relations in Jamaica. Madam Speaker, the Minister missed an ideal opportunity to tackle the long overdue structural reform to protect all workers who are being denied their full rights as employees under the guise of contract work. In fact, there are several categories of workers who face similar conditions as companies hide behind this fixed-term contract to deny them basic rights. Whether it is the hotel industry, the wholesale janitors, orderlies, even ancillary staff at some of our schools fall in that category. The Minister is on record that he will fix this issue for those working with government, but that is really not enough. The government must ensure that all workers are covered by the laws of Jamaica, and wherever there are breaches occurring, the government needs to ensure that it is resolved. Mr. Golding is already on record that if it's not done now, the People's National Party will fix it when we next form government. But if we are to be honest, the approach of the entire government has been strange. Yes, the compensation review has been an ambitious program, but that's exactly why there should have been greater openness and transparency and a more inclusive and collaborative approach from government. But again, we are not the same. The People's National Party has a strong record of defending workers and championing important progressive laws. That is who we are. And that is the reason why we say time come for a new direction in industrial relations, one that is more harmonious. livable wage. Let me use the opportunity to welcome the increase in minimum wage that has been announced by the government. True, it's not the 100% increase that was promised back in 2016, 7 years ago. Yes, it is not. In fact, this increase of 44% is nowhere near what was expected from them in their campaign promise back then. But that is where we are. Madam Speaker, the Leader of Opposition and our spokesperson on finance have both been on record as well, calling for a livable wage. And we are hoping that the government will begin the discussions that could get us there. Again, if it's not done, when the next PNP government comes to office, we will ensure that there is a livable wage. Madam Speaker, I understand that there are some government agencies that routinely sign contracts with service providers who are not able to pay their workers a minimum wage. When workers inquire, they are told that the company is waiting on a decision from Cabinet. So, Minister, I'm calling on the government of Jamaica to lead by example and ensure that the contract sums keep pace with the increases of minimum wage, so that the third-party companies are able to actually pay them, because they claim that is currently not being done. The truth is, we need a minister who is quick to respond to issues facing workers, a minister with a keen interest that is fully engaged in reaching a settlement in disputes between business leaders and workers and their representatives. Madam Speaker, today we have workers, industrial relations practitioners, business leaders yearning for the days when the minister showed a real interest in improving the industrial relations climate. At this point, no one can be blamed for coming to the conclusion, Minister, that there is no interest in these issues, or that you don't care or simply cannot manage your portfolio responsibilities. The truth is, the minister has failed our farm workers, he has failed our security guards, he has failed in the promise to meet the minimum wage increase that was promised of 100%. So what is left? You didn't hear that before. Yes. Yes, in 2016. In 2016. It is 77 years hence. Minister, time come either for a new Minister of Labour or a new approach to Labour. The truth, though, is that the silence of the Prime Minister in the face of these failures place him too under the spotlight. And the assessment is not favorable at all. In fact, many are thinking that time come for a new Prime Minister as well. Madam Speaker, I think most Jamaicans will readily agree that there are serious poverty, inequality and exclusion issues that have resulted in Jamaicans feeling isolated on the margins of society. This inequity is maintained by an education system that is sharply divided along socio-economic lines. The opposition spokesperson on finance reminded us in his contribution to the budget debate that 20% of our population is estimated to live below the poverty line and 30% live in informal settlements. It is becoming more and more obvious that the working class is becoming the working poor. And that has implications for the kind of support and protection strategy that need to be developed. Madam Speaker, when we speak of sustainable development, we focus on the economic issues. And these days, the environmental issues have become sexy and fashionable. However, we often ignore the third component, which is the social component. It isn't until social cohesion is threatened and we become concerned with negative behaviors like indiscipline, crime and violence, and deteriorating social norms, that we become concerned. We are often moved to action focusing on the manifestation of these issues, but not what is at the center of our dysfunction, the exclusion, systematic inequalities, and the stigmatization. And so with that, Madam Speaker, I turn to the issue of persons with disabilities. Madam Speaker, every report I've read indicates that persons with disabilities are disproportionately represented amongst the poorest, the unemployed, low-waged, and with low health status and lower levels of educational achievement. This is true that this is not unique to Jamaica. However, in Jamaica, persons with disabilities are also faced with issues of stigma, discrimination, marginalization, and social exclusion, and are often forced to or believe that they need to live in the margins of society. I am often told by parents and family members that when we as policymakers speak, there isn't much said about persons with disabilities, and that often the only ministry that might speak about that is the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. We need to move beyond that, because the single greatest task that is facing us as a country is to build an inclusive society. We must create conditions for persons with disabilities to see Jamaica as the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. I heard the Minister speak about the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, and I am glad that we are moving closer, because the truth of the matter is that without the establishment of the Disabilities Rights Tribunal, the law becomes almost a paper tiger and a symbolic move and nothing else. In terms of education, the highest level of education attained by most persons with disabilities is primary education, which indicates that there is significant work still to be done in terms of ensuring accessible infrastructure, adequate resources, and trained teachers. Healthcare. Access to healthcare is also limited for a number of persons with disabilities, again, due to the issues of accessibility. The truth is that we have to call on our municipal corporations to ensure that the provisions in the Building Act actually are monitored, and that the new building designs also conform with the rights that are guaranteed to persons with disabilities. Madam Speaker, I want to move a little bit now to the issues of our seniors. Madam Speaker, it cannot be such a difficult task for the government to put a plan in place that calculates and pays pensions on time. I'm totally baffled how you are able to calculate your pre-retirement leave, approve the effective date of the leave and effective date of retirement, and paying the actual pension still seems to be a mystery. I still get seniors complaining constantly about the lack of communication around payment of benefits and the callous and disrespectful manner with which they are often treated. Late payments occur with little or no notice, and inquiries are treated as if they are a nuisance. The ministry must be able to develop a mechanism of communicating with our seniors about these delays. A few days make a big difference when you are on fixed income, which doesn't leave much room for the bare necessities, plus the healthcare needs that face many of them. Madam Speaker, the Minister of National Security says that they are leading in integrating technology into their operations. So maybe some consultation between the Ministry of Labour and Social Security with the Ministry of National Security could yield to some kind of improvement in how we communicate with persons. Madam Speaker, in terms of path,
the member's time for speaking has expired. House Leader.
Madam Speaker, in keeping with your comment earlier on, Madam Speaker, and the understanding that the member has, I beg to move that she be allowed to wind up and complete her presentation. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
The question is that the member be allowed 10 minutes to complete her presentation. Those in favor? Those in favor? So she need 10 minutes. So she need 10 minutes. So
yes.
Those in favor?
Thank you very much.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, after the experience last year with you and I have no intention of asking for a minute over the 10 minutes. As MPs, we all have heard of the difficulties. Thank you very much, colleagues. We all know of the issues with getting people on the PART program, and we have heard from the Minister about some issues that are going to be done. Minister, I'm still concerned that we cannot get an effective partnership between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labour and Social Security to deal with our children on path. Despite what he said when I come in here and ask the questions, there are still too many guidance councillors who turn to us as MPs and corporate sponsors to deal with children who are in need. Yes? Yeah, especially for food. So we need to find another way of doing that. Madam Speaker, this Andrew Holness-led administration has failed to deliver to the most vulnerable amongst us. The most Honourable Portia Simpson Miller often spoke about balancing the books while balancing people's lives. This profound concept of the role of government about equity and creating an inclusive society is what I believe is missing in what we are seeing. These, I agree, are foundational principles of the PNP, and the next PNP government under Mark Golding is fully committed to ensuring this balance. You see, we understand that the duty of a responsible government is to design its policies and programs to effectively cover those that are most in need. Time comes for a new direction in our approach to poverty reduction. The main issue that faces us in terms of the programs that we are doing, the lack of appropriate social protection interventions, is the lack of capacity to deliver the social services, and also the fact that most of our programs do not focus on the root cause of poverty, but rather they focus on the consequences of poverty. When you do that, you really don't have an opportunity to break that intergenerational cycle of poverty. Madam Speaker, I would have loved to speak a little bit about the importance of decolonization, because I believe that it is at the heart and soul of making sure that Jamaicans who come from the background that we come from, many of whom look like me, with hair like me, speak like me, that they can become proud of their Africanness. If we are to talk about decolonization, that too has to be part of what we talk about, so that they can feel proud, we can feel proud of who we are and of how we speak, so that we can learn the history of our ancestors, so that we understand where we come from. Our African people in Jamaica constitute the poorest and most vulnerable under our monarchy, and will still be at the lowest economic rung in the new Republic of Jamaica unless they are made to feel proud of both our ethnicity and our nationality. Madam Speaker, throughout the history of the People's National Party, we have been true to the cause of workers. We have brought legislation from minimum wage in 1974, equal pay for equal work, the right to be unionized under the LRIDA, compulsory recognition of trade union and compensation for unfair dismissal through the IDT. That's our history. That's right. Our PNP government understands that harmony is essential to good industrial relations, and we are convinced that only through an inclusive society can there be any real shared prosperity. So the next PNP government, Madam Speaker, will make the necessary legislative changes to remove any ambiguity about the definition of workers and their conditions of employment. The next PNP government will undertake a series of reforms to ensure greater social protection for Jamaicans working in the informal economy. We will encourage the establishment of joint industrial councils in industries where there are high levels of employment, but there is no common standard for working conditions and no union representation. We will bring comprehensive legislation to eliminate abusive contractual arrangements that deprive employees of their rights. We will ensure that regular national labor market surveys are done to determine the demand for jobs and the factors affecting availability of components and a productive workforce. We will ensure that the content and methods of training through HART, CPTC, and other training institutions are evidence-based and data-driven. And we will treat actively with the stigmatization and discrimination faced by persons with disability through robust public education. The next PNP government will ensure that local authorities allocate resources to ensure that the construction of all new buildings adhere to the provisions in the Building Act and are in keeping, as I said, with our commitment to access to persons with disability. We will also ensure that greater resources are provided to increase the educational performance of persons with disability. Some of that sometimes just simply include specific training of our teachers. The next PNP government will place emphasis on preparing persons with disabilities for employment. We will also review our national pension scheme to ensure sustainability and impact. And we will review national health insurance schemes to ensure broader and more effective coverage. Madam Speaker, we will undertake a comprehensive review of the social protection programs such as PATH to ensure improved targeting and broader coverage. Madam Speaker, fellow Jamaicans, as I have said and I have shown, it is time for us as a nation to chart a new direction for labor in Jamaica. Thank you very much.